The night before the Alpha King's coronation, the Iron Moon Castle had never looked more alive. Torchlight spilled through every corridor like liquid gold, warming the ancient stone walls that had stood for 3 centuries. The great hall hummed with laughter, with wine, with the intoxicating promise of a new reign. Servants moved in elegant formations, draping garlands of frost-white blossoms across iron railings. Musicians tuned their instruments in the eastern gallery. War banners bearing the Iron Moon crest Black Wolf. Silver moon hung from the rafters like declarations of forever. It was the most beautiful night Serena Vale had ever seen. And it was the night that destroyed her. She almost didn't go looking for him. She had been standing in the healer's corridor near the east wing, one hand pressed flat against the cold stone wall, steadying herself. Her heart was beating too fast. Her thoughts were spinning. The news she carried felt too large for her body, something warm and terrifying and impossibly wonderful all at once. She needed to tell him, not tomorrow, when he would be crowned king in front of 1,000 wolves. Not in a letter. Not through a servant. Tonight. Just him. Just her. Just the truth she had been carrying alone for 3 days. She moved through the castle the way she always did, quietly, close to the walls, invisible in the way healers learn to be. She passed guards without being questioned. She crossed the great hall without being noticed. She was good at that, disappearing into the edges of beautiful rooms. She found him in the royal chamber off the northern corridor. The door was open, just barely. A thin wedge of torchlight cut across the stone floor where she stopped. And inside that light, Kalin, her Kalin, the man who had kissed her temple in the dark and told her she made the world quieter, the man who remembered the names of every servant in the castle, the man whose arms were the only place in the world where Serena Vale had never once felt like she was disappearing. He was not alone. A woman stood pressed against him in the firelight. Noble-born Serena recognized the deep crimson gown, the jeweled collar of the council houses. Her hands were on Kalin's chest. His hands were at her waist. Their faces were inches apart. The world went silent. Not the gentle, quiet Kalin once, said Serena, carried with her. This silence was the sound of something breaking. She didn't wait. She didn't call out his name. She didn't push open the door and demand an explanation, the way her heart was screaming at her to do, because the pain didn't give her time for courage. It hit too fast, too deep, like a blade through something she hadn't known was unprotected. She turned, and she ran. Before we continue, please hit the subscribe and like button and tell me which city you're tuning in from. I love to know where this story found you. Now let's dive in. Down the corridor, down the stairs, through the servants' entrance, and out into the cold night air where the torches ended and the darkness began. She ran until the castle lights faded behind her, until the music died, until the only sound left was her own ragged breathing and the crunch of frost beneath her feet. She ran until the forest swallowed her whole. She didn't look back. She told herself she wouldn't. By the time the first pale light of dawn crept over the northern mountains, the Iron Moon Castle was preparing to crown its new king. Celebration drums echoed across the territories. Wolves howled in ceremonial salute. The kingdom gathered around its most powerful ruler in a century. No one noticed the healer's daughter was gone. No one knew she had left behind something she hadn't found the words for yet. No one knew she was already deep in the wilderness, moving north, moving fast, moving away from the only man who had ever made her feel like more than a shadow in someone else's story. And no one, not Serena, not Kalin, not the council watching his coronation from their carved stone seats, could have predicted what 5 years of silence would build. 5 years later, they called Ravencrest the pack that couldn't be broken. 3 alphas had tried to rule it and failed. 2 kings had marched armies toward its mountain fortress and turned back. The council had sent diplomats, threats, ultimatums, none of it mattered. Ravencrest endured. Ravencrest resisted. And in the last 2 years, Ravencrest had done something no rebel pack had managed in a generation. It had expanded. Rogue wolves from 6 territories had pledged their loyalty to its banner. Its strategies were precise, unpredictable, brilliant. Its alpha, whoever they were, had turned a fractured mountain clan into something that made even the Iron Moon throne uneasy. Now Caelan Draven had come to end it. His army filled the valley below the fortress like a dark tide. 10,000 wolves, iron moon banners, cutting through the mountain wind. The most feared ruler in the northern territories, come to claim the last pack that refused to bow. He stood at the edge of the tree line, jaw set, eyes lifted toward the fortress wall above. And then the gates opened. A figure appeared on the high stone balcony, dark hair loose in the mountain wind, silver wolf insignia gleaming at her chest, posture so still, so controlled, so completely unafraid that his soldiers instinctively went quiet. Callan felt the mate bond ignite before his mind caught up with his eyes. It moved through him like wildfire through dry grass, sudden, violent, devastating. No, he knew that feeling. He had spent 5 years trying to forget it. 5 years of searching, of hunting, of finally convincing himself she was dead, because the alternative that she had chosen to leave was a wound he couldn't survive reopening. The woman on the balcony looked down at him, and Serena Vale ghost, deserter, the missing piece of him looked directly into his eyes without flinching. She wore a crown, his enemy's crown. Nobody moved. Not his generals, not his soldiers, not the 10,000 wolves standing in disciplined formation across the valley floor. They had followed Callan Draven into wars that reshaped borders. They had watched him walk into burning buildings and come out unscathed. They had seen him absorb news of assassination attempts with nothing more than a slow blink. They had never seen him stop breathing, but he had stopped now. His second-in-command, Commander Rhett, stepped close enough to speak quietly. "My king, their alpha approaches the wall. Do you want archers on the—" "Stand down." The words came out flat. Absolute. Rhett fell silent immediately. Callan didn't move, didn't speak again. He stood at the tree line with his eyes fixed on the figure above the fortress wall and the mate bond that faint, damaged thread he had spent 5 years learning to ignore, burned through his chest like something long dead had suddenly remembered it was alive. Serena, he said her name inside his mind, the way a man touches a wound to confirm it's real. Serena Vale. Alive. The night she vanished, Caelan had searched the castle himself. He remembered it with the kind of precision that only comes from replaying something too many times. The coronation preparations, the noise of celebration, filling every corridor. The moment he realized she wasn't in the healer's wing, wasn't in the library, wasn't in any of the 3 places she usually went when the castle became too loud for her. He had sent scouts within the hour. By midnight, trackers were in the forest. By dawn, the same dawn, he was crowned in front of the entire kingdom, standing at the altar with a face carved from stone. Her trail had gone cold near the northern ridge. He had smiled for the ceremony. He had shaken hands and accepted oaths of loyalty and spoken the coronation words in a clear, steady voice. And the entire time, a single thought ran beneath all of it, like an underground river. She's gone, she's gone, she's gone. The first month, he told himself she needed time, that something had frightened her, that she would send word. The second month, he doubled the search, quietly, without involving the council. Trackers in the East Territories, the southern borderlands, the rogue lands beyond the Ashvale Mountains. Nothing. By the 6th month, the rumors had started. Whispers in corridors, careful and vague, that the healer's daughter had been taken by rogue wolves, that she had broken under the pressure of being a king's mate and fled, that she was dead, frozen in some nameless forest, unmourned and unmissed. Callan had silenced every man he caught repeating that last one. He had never believed it, not once, because the mate bond didn't work that way. If she were dead, he would have felt it a clean snap, like a rope pulled past its limit. What he felt instead was something slower, something that ached, a thread stretched thin across an impossible distance, still present, still pulling, too stubborn to break entirely. She was alive somewhere. He had known it for 5 years. He just hadn't known this. He hadn't known she was here, that she had built something here, that while he was sitting on a throne and running a kingdom and quietly falling apart at the edges, Serena Vale had become the one thing standing between his crown and its completion, His scouts had described Ravencrest's alpha in careful, tactical terms. Brilliant strategist, commanding presence, fiercely protected by her pack. No bloodline claimed to the title, she had taken it by force of will alone. They had never once mentioned it was her. Kaelin exhaled slowly through his nose. The woman on the balcony hadn't moved. She stood the way she always had when she was trying very hard not to show what she was feeling. Perfectly still, chin level, eyes forward. He had learned that stillness years ago, had once found it beautiful. Now it felt like a wall he didn't have the tools to climb. She chose this. Some cold part of him said, she didn't die. She didn't disappear. She chose a side, and it wasn't yours. He turned back to his camp before the thought could finish destroying him. Inside the fortress, Serena let out the breath she had been holding since the gates opened. Alpha. Her war chief, Devon, appeared at her shoulder, broad, steady, reliable as stone. Their forward lines haven't moved. It looks like they're holding for now. They'll hold until he decides what he wants to do. She kept her voice even. Post the eastern archers on rotation. I want eyes on that tree line through the night. Understood. Davin hesitated. You know who he is. It wasn't a question. Serena looked out over the valley. 10,000 wolves and one man she had spent 5 years trying to stop loving. The wind came off the mountain cold and sharp, and she welcomed it. She needed something sharp right now. I know exactly who he is, she said quietly. She turned from the wall before her hands could betray her with trembling, because Devon didn't need to know that her heart was still beating his name. She hadn't always been this. The armor, the authority, the careful stillness she wore like a second skin. There had been a time not so long ago, though it felt like another lifetime, when Serena Vale moved through the world, with open hands and an open face, when her first instinct toward pain was not strategy but gentleness. Her mother used to say that healers were made, not born. Serena had believed her. Right up until the night she learned that some wounds don't respond to gentle hands. Some wounds require you to become something harder than the thing that broke you. But that came later. Before that, there was the girl she used to be. She had grown up in the lower quarters of Iron Moon territory, in the narrow stone building behind the castle's east gate, where the pack healers worked. Her mother's hands smelled always of dried herbs and clean linen. Her childhood was quiet, not unhappy, just small, contained. She learned early that the world had very little use for a healer's daughter who wasn't noble-born, so she made herself useful. She learned every plant in the territory's forest. She memorized pressure points, wound-packing techniques, fever treatments. She worked beside her mother from the age of 9, and by 16 she could suture a deep cut faster and cleaner than most trained healers twice her age. She was kind in a way that asked nothing back. That was her nature. Not naivety, she understood that the world was not kind in return, but a deliberate choice she made every morning. That compassion was not weakness. That gentleness, wielded with intention, was its own form of strength. She hummed when she was nervous. She never knew she did it until someone told her. The someone was Kaelin Draven. She met him 3 years before his coronation, in the aftermath of a border skirmish that brought 17 injured wolves to the castle's healing ward. She had been working for 6 hours straight when the last man arrived, not carried on a stretcher like the others, but walking under his own power, jaw set, refusing to acknowledge that the gash across his left side was deep enough to need immediate attention. He was the ranking officer, young for it, early 20s, with dark, curly hair and the kind of controlled authority that made rooms rearrange themselves around him. He sat where she pointed without speaking. He didn't flinch when she cleaned the wound. He watched her work with dark eyes that were impossible to read. She hummed without realizing it. "What is that?" he asked. She looked up, confused. "What?" "That sound." She felt heat rise in her face. "I do it when I'm concentrating. I'm sorry. I can stop." "Don't." Something in his voice shifted, not softer exactly, but less guarded. It makes the room quieter somehow." She didn't know what to say to that, so she went back to work. He came back the following week. Not for treatment. He stood in the corridor outside the ward with a book held somewhat awkwardly at his side, thick, leather-bound, from the Royal Library, a compendium of northern plant medicines, some of the pages annotated in old script. "I was told you use the eastern forest for supplies," he said. "This maps varieties that stopped being catalogued 50 years ago. I thought it might be useful." She stared at him for a long moment. "You went to the Royal Library for me?" He looked faintly uncomfortable with how that had sounded out loud. "I was already there." He had not been already there. She found out weeks later that the Royal Library required a personal key, and that he had gone specifically, and that the librarian had noted it because the future Alpha King requesting a healer's reference text was unusual enough to mention. She never told him she knew. She let him keep the story. That became the shape of them. Quiet, incremental, improbable. He returned when he could, which was never often enough. Training, border duties, council obligations pulling him in directions she couldn't follow. But when he was there, he was present in a way that undid her completely. He remembered things, small things, that she disliked the smell of pine resin, that she always worked better with the window open, that she hummed a different melody depending on how tired she was. He noticed her, in a world that had spent most of her life looking past her. Kaelin Draven paid attention. She fell in love the way she did most things, quietly, thoroughly, without fanfare. And the night he told her the moon had chosen her as his mate, she had stood very still and felt something enormous and terrifying settle into place, like a key turning in a lock she hadn't known existed. It had felt like beginning. She hadn't known it was already counting down. Now, in the cold dark of the Ravencrest fortress, Serena sat alone in her war room long after her commanders had gone, and she pressed her fingers flat against the stone table and breathed until the memories went quiet. The girl who hummed softly in a healing ward, the girl who believed gentleness was strength. She had not been wrong about that. She had simply learned that sometimes strength needed to look like something else entirely. She had been happy that evening. That was the part that stayed with her longest, not the image in the doorway, not the cold night air that swallowed her whole when she ran, but the happiness that preceded it. The particular, fragile happiness of someone who believes the future has finally decided to be kind to them. She remembered humming. She had been standing at the small basin in the healer's quarters, washing the herb stain from her fingers, and she had been humming not the tired melody she used when exhausted, but something brighter, quicker, the kind that comes from a secret you're about to stop keeping. 3 days. She had carried the knowledge for 3 days, terrified and elated in equal measure, waiting for the right moment. But tonight the castle was blazing with light and noise, and Kaelin would be crowned at dawn, and she had decided she couldn't wait anymore. She needed to tell him. She was carrying his child. The castle had never been more beautiful, or more impossible to move through quickly. Every corridor was crowded nobles from the outlying territories, council members in ceremonial dress, servants carrying trays and garlands and rolled banners. The great hall spilled over with music and firelight. Everyone was celebrating something that would change everything. Serena moved through it all with her hood up and her eyes down, the way she always navigated spaces that weren't meant for her, past the eastern gallery, up the servants' stair, along the north corridor toward the private chambers where Kaelin sometimes went when the ceremony preparations became suffocating, the one quiet place he had shown her months ago, before anyone knew what they were to each other. My escape route, he had called it, with the rare, crooked, almost smile she had spent months learning to recognize. She rounded the last corner and slowed. The door was open, not fully, just enough. A thin blade of torchlight fell across the stone floor, and from inside the room came the low murmur of voices. She almost called his name. Almost. Then she looked through the gap. He was there, and he was not alone. The woman was noble-born. Serena placed it instantly. The deep crimson gown, the jeweled collar of the high council houses, the kind of deliberate beauty that is assembled, not inherited. She was standing very close to Kaelin, one hand pressed flat against his chest, her face tilted up toward his with a particular kind of certainty, the certainty of a woman who believes she is exactly where she belongs, Kaylin's hands were at her waist. Their faces were inches apart. The torchlight made it look like something inevitable. The sound Serena did not make surprised her. She had always assumed that a moment like this would produce noise, a gasp, a word, a sob catching in the throat. Instead, the pain arrived in total silence. It moved through her like cold water replacing warm, filling every space, calm and complete and absolute. She did not move. For the space of 3 full seconds, she stood in the corridor outside that door, and she did not breathe, and she did not think, and she felt the mate bond, that extraordinary, impossible thread. She had spent months learning the shape of go tight and then slack in a way that had no name. The woman laughed softly at something. Serena stepped back from the door. She told herself later that she should have pushed it open. She should have walked in and demanded the explanation she deserved, the way someone with steadier ground beneath her feet might have done. She should have been louder, harder, more certain of her own right to be there. But she was a healer's daughter, in a castle full of council nobles, and the man she had loved quietly for 2 years had his hands on a woman who wore the kind of gown Serena would never own, and the joy she had been carrying for 3 days turned to ash so quickly that all she could do was move. She walked back down the north corridor, then faster, down the servants' stair, through the eastern gallery, past the great hall where the music was still playing and no one looked at her, because no one ever looked at her, through the kitchen passage and out the low door that opened to the side of the castle. The night air hit her like a wall. She kept moving. She told herself she would stop at the east gate, that she would find somewhere quiet and think, that there was an explanation, probably, that she should breathe, that she should wait. She did not stop at the east gate. She did not stop at the forest's edge. She ran until the castle disappeared behind the trees, until the torchlight was gone, until the music was gone, until the only sound left was the wind through the pines and the sound of her own feet on frozen ground, carrying her away from everything she had trusted herself to love. She ran north. She didn't look back. She carried his name in her chest the whole way quietly, helplessly, like a wound she had wrapped too tightly to ever properly heal. And by the time dawn came, and the iron moon drums sounded for his coronation across the territories, Serena Vale was already gone. The wilderness nearly killed her on the 3rd night. She had made it further north than she expected, driven by grief and cold adrenaline, moving on instinct rather than plan, following the ridge line because it was the only landmark she could track in the dark. She had no supplies, no weapon, a healer's knowledge of edible plants that was useless under snow cover, and a body that had never been asked to survive anything harder than a long shift in the ward. By the 2nd day, she was shaking. By the 3rd, she had stopped feeling her feet. She heard them before she saw them, 4 rogues, unaffiliated, the kind that drifted through unclaimed territory like wreckage from someone else's war. They came from the tree line without warning. No hierarchy, no restraint, nothing to negotiate with. She ran. She didn't get far. The last thing she remembered clearly was the ground rising up to meet her, and then a sound: wolves, more wolves, a different kind of howl, organized and deliberate, and then nothing. She woke in a stone room with a low ceiling and the smell of pine smoke. A woman sat across from her, arms crossed, watching her with the particular patience of someone who has decided to wait rather than ask. Broad shoulders, a scar that ran from her left ear to her jaw, eyes that assessed without warmth, but without cruelty either. "You fought back," the woman said finally, "against 4 of them, unarmed." Serena said nothing. "You lost," the woman added, "but you didn't run." "I ran first," Serena said. Her voice came out rougher than expected. Running didn't work. Something shifted in the woman's expression. Not quite a smile, more like the beginning of a recalibration. Her name was Mira. She was a senior lieutenant of the Ravencrest pack, and she had been tracking the rogue group for 2 weeks. Serena had stumbled directly into an ambush that was already in motion. "You're not a wolf," Mira said. It wasn't an accusation, more an observation looking for context. "No. What are you?" Serena looked at the ceiling for a moment. "I don't know yet." she said honestly. Ravencrest should have sent her south once she recovered. That was protocol for non-pack outsiders found in their territory. Mira filed the report. The Alpha reviewed it, but something in the report made him pause. She had fought 4 rogues unarmed for long enough to matter. She had trekked 3 days through northern winter without supplies and nearly survived. And when Mira told him, the girl had woken up, asking not "Where am I?" or "Who are you?" but "What do you need from me?" He made a different call. She could stay. Provisionally. Under observation. She stayed. The training was not offered. She asked for it. Mira said no twice. The third time, Serena showed up before dawn at the training ground and stood there until someone agreed to work with her. They started her with basic defense because that was protocol. Within 2 weeks, they moved her past it because she learned, with the focused intensity of someone who understands, on a cellular level, that her life depends on it. She was not naturally gifted. She was not fast, not strong, not instinctively aggressive the way the pack wolves were. What she had instead was precision, patience, and a healer's understanding of the body, where it was vulnerable, how it compensated for damage, the exact point at which pain became incapacitating. She applied that knowledge in reverse. She studied every fighter she sparred with the way she had once studied wounds. She lost constantly for the first 8 months. Then she started winning. Not always. Not easily. But enough that the pack stopped looking at her the way they had in the beginning, like a curiosity. A temporary problem. Something fragile that had wandered too far from home. They started looking at her, the way wolves look at someone they would stand behind. It took 2 years to earn that. She counted every day of it. The Alpha died in the 3rd year. A border conflict with a rival clan, unexpected, fast, brutal. He had been strong and fair, and the pack grieved him properly. Then the challenge was called. 5 contenders. Every one of them a born wolf, pack-raised, with years of combat seniority. Serena's name on the list caused visible confusion in the war room and quiet, careful laughter among the junior fighters who didn't yet understand what she was. The challenge lasted 4 rounds over 2 days. She won 3 of them. The final match was against Devan, her own war chief, as it would turn out. He was bigger, faster, and had been fighting since before she had arrived. He was also, as she had spent 2 years quietly noting, deeply predictable when he was pushed past his comfort point. She waited. She absorbed. She let him tire himself against her defense. Then she moved. When it was over, Davan looked up at her from the ground for a long moment. Then he put his fist to his chest and lowered his head. The rest of the pack followed. She did not celebrate. She walked back to her room, sat on the edge of her bed, and pressed her face into her hands and breathed. She was not the same woman who had run from a castle in the dark. She knew that. She just wasn't certain yet what this new woman would cost her. The gates opened at noon. No trumpets, no ceremony. Just the slow, deliberate grind of iron and stone as Ravencrest's fortress doors parted wide enough to make a statement: we are not hiding, and we are not afraid. And then the measured sound of boots on the mountain path descending toward the valley floor. Kaelin had positioned himself at the front of his line. His generals had advised against it. He had not entertained the argument. He watched her come down. She was flanked by 8 warriors large, disciplined, their eyes moving across his army with the practiced assessment of people who had calculated this exact scenario in advance. They walked in close formation but not crowded. Space around their Alpha. Room for her to move if she needed to. She wouldn't need to, and they all knew it. The formation was a message, not a precaution. Serena walked at the center with the kind of stillness that is not passive, the stillness of something fully coiled. She wore dark, fitted armor, functional rather than ceremonial, the silver wolf of Ravencrest at her chest. Her dark hair was back. Her face was composed in a way that Kaelin recognized at a molecular level, because he had spent years learning the precise distance between her composure and what lived underneath it. She stopped 6 feet from him. The valley went quiet enough that Kaelin could hear the wind cutting through the pines above them. He looked at her. She looked at him. 5 years collapsed into the space between them like a held breath. finally released not with relief, but with the particular weight of everything that had been compressed inside it. "You're there, Alpha," he said. It came out quiet. He hadn't intended a question, but the words tilted upward at the end, because some part of him had apparently still not finished believing it. Yes, no hesitation, no softening. He absorbed that, the single syllable landing precisely where she had aimed it. How long? 2 years. And before that, I survived. Her eyes didn't move from his. That's all you need to know. Kalen kept his jaw still. It took more effort than it should have. Serena, Alpha Vale. She said it without heat, which was somehow worse than if she had been angry. In this territory, that's the correct address. Behind him, he felt his generals recalibrate. He ignored them. Alpha Vale, he said, and the name tasted like something foreign in his mouth. I'd like to discuss the terms of, I know why you're here. She glanced briefly at the army behind him, a single sweep, unhurried, as if counting numbers she had already counted from the wall. 10,000 wolves against a mountain fortress, the Iron Moon throne completing its map. Her eyes came back to his. I've been expecting this visit for a year. Then you know I'd prefer not to make it a war. What you prefer, she said, is Ravencrest's surrender. That's not a negotiation. That's a demand with more polite language wrapped around it. Kalen held her gaze. Why did you leave? The shift was abrupt off the formal language, past the political framing, straight to the thing that had been sitting between them since the gates opened. He watched something move behind her eyes. Quick, controlled immediately. You know why, she said. I'd like to hear you say it. I saw you. The words came out level, precise, the way she spoke when she was being very careful not to feel what she was saying. The night before your coronation, the North Chamber. I saw you with her, Serena, her hands on your chest. Still level, still precise. Your hands at her waist. Your faces. A pause, slight. I saw enough. You saw a moment that wasn't what it looked like. It looked exactly like what it was. It wasn't. The control in his voice fractured slightly at the edges. If you had stayed, if you had waited 10 more seconds. I had waited long enough. Something shifted in her expression, not a crack, more like a seam under pressure. I had trusted long enough. I had believed long enough. She looked at him with eyes that held 5 years of winter in them. I was not going to stay in that corridor and wait for you to find the right words. So instead you disappeared. Instead I survived. The word landed hard, which is apparently something I'm better at than you expected. Silence. Kalen looked at her, really looked, the way he had not allowed himself to since the balcony, and saw it all at once. What 5 years had built in the space where the girl he loved used to be. Not a replacement. Not a mask. Something that had grown from the same roots and become an entirely different shape. It should not have made the mate bond worse. It did. I can't leave Ravencrest standing outside my alliance, he said finally. You know that. And I can't surrender a pack that made me what I am. She held his gaze without apology. So it seems we have a problem. The wind came down the mountain, cold and sharp, between them. Neither moved. Negotiations were over before they had begun. They met inside the fortress. Serena's terms. Her war room, her table, her wolves stationed at every door. Kalen came with 2 Ret and his senior tracker and left the rest of his army in the valley. It was either a gesture of good faith or an acknowledgement that 10,000 soldiers meant nothing inside stone walls, surrounded by Ravencrest's best fighters. Probably both. The room was spare. A long table. Maps waited at the corners. A fire burning low in the far wall. Serena stood at the head of it. She did not offer him a seat. He pulled one out and sat anyway. For a moment, neither spoke. The fire shifted. Outside, the mountain wind moved across the fortress walls with a sound like breathing. The council, Kalen said, set me up. Serena looked at him across the table. The woman you saw that night. He kept his voice flat, not emotionless, but controlled. The way he spoke when the subject was something he had rehearsed too many times to perform naturally anymore. Her name was Councillor Vale's daughter, Marin. The council had been pressuring me for 8 months to formalize an alliance through marriage. A noble woman, an approved bloodline, someone who would give the throne the political legitimacy they wanted. You refused. Every time. He looked at her steadily. Because I had a mate. Because the bond had already declared itself. Because I had no intention of marrying anyone the council selected for me. Serena said nothing. Her hands were flat on the table in front of her, so they stopped asking. Kaelin continued. 3 days before the coronation, I received a message Marin needed to discuss urgent council business. Private. North Chamber, 9th hour. He paused. I should have refused the meeting. I knew what it was the moment I walked in. She was already there. Already positioned. Already, he stopped. Exhaled once. It was a staging. A designed scene. Her hands on me before I'd said a word. Her face tilted up. The door conspicuously open. The fire cracked behind him. I was pushing her back, he said quietly. That's what you didn't see. I had my hands at her waist because I was moving her away from me. Another 3 seconds, and there would have been nothing to misread. His eyes didn't leave Serena's face, but you were already gone. The silence that followed was a different kind than before. Serena stood very still. Something was happening behind her eyes. He could see it. The careful internal movement of someone taking a structure they have built their life around and pressing it in a new place to test whether it holds. That's a very convenient story, she said finally. It's the truth. You had 5 years to construct it. I had 5 years of knowing exactly what happened in that room and no one to tell it to. Something broke through the control in his voice, brief, quickly recovered. Do you think I didn't search for you? Do you think I didn't spend the first year tearing apart every territory between here and the southern border, trying to find you so I could explain? You searched for me, she said. And there was something in the way she said it, not quite mockery, not quite pain. And yet here I am, 2 years as alpha of a pack in your own northern territory, and your scouts never found me. Your pack protected you. My pack didn't know who I was running from. She looked at him steadily. They just knew I was worth protecting. Kaelin absorbed that without response. Serena moved to the window, her back to him, something he recognized as a choice, a deliberate exposure, the kind of thing you only do when you need a moment your face can't afford to give away. The council, she said quietly. You're telling me that everything, 5 years of silence, 5 years of building something from nothing, 5 years of becoming someone I barely recognize, all of it came from a scene they staged in under a minute. Serena, don't. Not angry. Something worse than angry. I need a moment. He gave it to her. She stood at the window looking out over the valley where his army waited, and he watched her shoulders move with one long, slow breath. The mate bond between them always present, always aching, pulled tight in a way that was almost unbearable. He had learned to live with the distance of it. Up close, it was something else entirely. She turned back. Whatever she had decided to show him, it was less than what she felt. He knew that. He also knew better than to say so. Even if I believed you. The door opened. Davan. His face was wrong tight, stripped of the usual deliberate calm. He crossed to Serena in 4 steps and spoke low and fast against her ear. Serena's expression didn't change, but her eyes did. She looked at Kaelin. Council soldiers, she said. 300, moving up the eastern ridge. A pause. They didn't come with you. No. He was already standing. They followed me. The truth of it settled between them in an instant, ugly, clarifying, the final piece of the picture snapping into place. The council had never intended negotiations. They had used Kaelin's army as cover, and Serena was the real target. There was no warning shot. The council soldiers came over the eastern ridge in formation, disciplined, fast, moving with the coordinated precision of a force that had rehearsed this exact approach. Not a raiding party, not a border skirmish, a surgical strike designed to hit the fortress from the flank, while Kaelin's army held position in the valley below, effectively sealing every exit. Serena had the fortress on full alert in under 2 minutes. She moved through the war room, issuing orders in clipped, sequential bursts: eastern archers to the upper wall, ground wolves to the inner gate, Davan to the northern passage with the reserve unit. Her commanders absorbed each instruction and disappeared without question. The loyalty was immediate, automatic, the kind that doesn't require repetition. Kalen watched it and said nothing. He had brought 2 men inside. He sent Rhett back to the valley with a single instruction: hold position. Do not engage Ravencrest forces. Wait for his signal, and kept his tracker close. Serena glanced at him as she buckled her chest plate. You should go back to your army. My army isn't under attack. Yet. She pulled the last strap tight. The Council won't stop at Ravencrest. If they've decided to move independently, you're a loose end too. I'm aware. She looked at him for exactly 1 second, assessing, recalibrating, then turned back to the window where the first sounds of the eastern assault were beginning to reach them. Steel on stone, the low, resonant shift of wolves changing form, the particular quality of noise that a battle makes in its first 30 seconds before it becomes chaos. Stay out of my fighter's way, she said, and moved toward the door. He followed her out. The eastern wall was already engaged by the time they reached it. Council soldiers had breached the outer gate, a coordinated charge, shields forward, designed to overwhelm rather than outmaneuver. What they hadn't calculated was Ravencrest's ground response. Serena's wolves didn't hold the gate. They let it fall and collapsed inward, drawing the first wave into the fortress courtyard where the terrain narrowed and their numbers became a liability rather than an advantage. She had planned for this. Kalen understood that immediately. The internal layout of the fortress, the choke points, the elevated positions, the way the courtyard funneled attackers into predictable lines, had all been designed with exactly this scenario in mind. Ravencrest had always known, on some level, that this day would come. They had simply built for it. He moved to the upper walkway, his tracker at his back, watching the courtyard below fill with motion. Wolves shifting under the moonlight that had begun to break through the cloud cover, the change moving through them in waves, the sound of it low and resonant beneath the clash of steel. Serena's fighters moved in coordinated pairs, covering each other's flanks with the fluency of people who had trained together long enough to think in formation. She was at the center of it. She hadn't shifted. She couldn't. She was human, but she moved through the chaos with a short blade in each hand, and the spatial awareness of someone who had spent 2 years learning to fight in a world built for wolves. She read the battle the way she had once read injuries, finding the critical point, the place where intervention would matter most, moving toward it before anyone else had identified it. He was watching her take down a council soldier twice her size when the 3 men came over the inner wall behind her. She didn't see them. He was already moving. He hit the first one before they reached her, putting the man into the courtyard wall with enough force to end the conversation immediately. The second turned. Kalen caught the strike on his forearm and redirected it. Close and ugly, the kind of fighting that has no elegance because there's no room for it. The third had a blade already swinging toward Serena's back. She turned at the last second, reflex, instinct, and found the threat already neutralized. Kalen standing between her and where the danger had been, breathing hard, a cut across his jaw from the second man's ring. They looked at each other. Something passed between them that neither acknowledged out loud. Then she turned back to the battle and he turned with her, and without a word they moved together into the next wave, her reading the ground, him covering her blind angles, the two of them falling into a rhythm that had no business being as natural as it was, given 5 years of silence and everything still unresolved between them. The mate bond didn't ask permission. It simply recognized what it had always known, that they moved better together than apart, that their instincts had been shaped by each other in ways that 5 years hadn't touched, that whatever had been broken between them had not broken this. The battle shifted, then turned. Council soldiers began pulling back toward the ridge, their formation fracturing under pressure they hadn't anticipated from a pack they had expected to fold. Serena drove them back to the eastern gate and held. When the last of them retreated into the dark, the courtyard went quiet except for the sound of wolves breathing and fire burning and the wind coming down cold off the mountain. Kaelin stood beside her in the aftermath. Neither of them moved away. The council's retreat didn't last. They regrouped on the eastern ridge before midnight, a second formation, larger than the first, the reserves they had held back for exactly this contingency. Whoever had planned this operation had planned it carefully. They had anticipated Ravencrest's resistance. They had not anticipated what was waiting for them when they came back down the ridge. Kaelin's army. Rhett had moved the moment the council soldiers broke from the valley's northern edge, not toward the fortress, but around it, cutting off the ridge approach with 10,000 wolves who had been standing in formation for hours with nothing to do but wait. The council force found themselves between Ravencrest's walls and the Iron Moon army, in terrain that favored neither retreat nor advance. It ended quickly after that. Not cleanly. Not without cost. Ravencrest lost 4 fighters on the eastern wall, and Kaelin's left flank took casualties in the ridge push that he would carry quietly for a long time. But it ended. The council soldiers laid down arms before the second hour, and by the time the moon reached its peak above the mountain, the fortress courtyard was still. The evidence was in their own documents. Rhett found the orders in the council commander's satchel written, sealed, explicit, destroy Ravencrest, eliminate its alpha, manage the king as necessary. The language was careful in the way that bureaucratic violence always is, each word chosen to sound administrative rather than criminal, while describing something irreversible. Kaelin read them once. Then he sent copies north, south, and east to every pack leader in the alliance, to the territorial judges, to the 3 council members who had opposed the majority faction and survived the last decade by staying quiet. The quiet ones spoke now. By the following week, the Iron Moon Council had been dissolved by territorial decree. 3 of its senior members were in custody. The rest had scattered in the particular way that powerful people scatter, when the structure protecting them collapses fast, without dignity. Each one suddenly unable to recall the specific meeting where the specific decision had been made. Kaelin let the legal process handle them. He had other things to settle. Ravencrest remained standing. That was the first thing made clear in the formal negotiations that followed the battle, not as a concession, but as a foundation. Serena sat across the table from Kaelin's senior generals, with maps and territorial records, and 5 years of governance, documented in precise detail, and she made the case for Ravencrest's independence with the calm authority of someone who has never needed permission to occupy a room. The alliance they built was not surrender dressed in polite language. It was a genuine architecture. 2 territories, 2 leaderships, mutual defense obligations, trade access, shared border protections. Ravencrest would not bow to the Iron Moon throne. The Iron Moon throne would recognize Ravencrest's sovereignty. Both would be stronger for the arrangement than either had been in opposition. Kaelin signed it without amendment. His generals looked at each other. He didn't explain himself. He didn't need to. The terms were sound, and anyone who understood the Northern Territories understood that a willing Ravencrest was worth 10 times a conquered one. What no one in that room said aloud was the simpler truth underneath all the formal language. He would have signed anything she brought to that table. She found him outside after. Or perhaps he had positioned himself to be found standing on the lower path beyond the fortress gate, where the mountain fell away and the valley spread out silver and vast under the full moon. No armor, no crown. His generals were inside. His army was camped in the valley below. Up here, there was only the wind and the moonlight, and the particular silence of a place that has recently been loud. He heard her footsteps and didn't turn. She stopped beside him and looked out over the valley the same way he was looking, and for a moment neither of them manufactured words to fill the space. Then he said, quietly, to the valley below, "I never stopped looking for you." Serena was still for a long moment. He turned to look at her then, not the king, not the commanding officer, not the man who had spent 5 years ruling a kingdom while a single absence ate at the center of everything. Just Kaelin, the man who had gone to a royal library for a book on northern plants and pretended it was nothing. The man who remembered which melody meant she was tired. She studied his face the way she used to study wounds carefully, without rushing, looking for what was true beneath the surface. Then, quietly, "Maybe you don't have to anymore." The mate bond didn't announce itself. It didn't ignite or explode. or arrive with the violence of something long suppressed. It simply settled deep and certain and whole, the way a door sounds when it finally closes properly after years of drifting open in the dark. Not forced, not fated, chosen by two people who had survived everything that tried to separate them, and had decided, not because the moon demanded it, but because they were standing here, now, and both of them knew what they wanted to stop surviving apart. The moon rose higher, over two united territories. Below, the valley was quiet. The war was over. The truth had been told, and the man who had searched for 5 years finally had somewhere to stop. The moon didn't bring them back together. Love did. If this story moved you, tell me in the comments. I read every one. And if you want more stories like this, subscribe. Your support is what makes the next moonlit tale possible.